This old Latin phrase, cui bono, who benefits. I think a lot of the world, speaking of frameworks, can be explained by just thinking about who benefits. When there's some crazy policy that comes down the pike, just think to yourself, who benefits? And if that becomes habitual, then it really does have explanatory and, more importantly, predictive value. That's helpful in terms of investing.
Hello and welcome to the Academy on Capitalism's YouTube channel. If you happen to like this video, make sure you hit the like button. And if you like this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We have plenty of great interviews coming to you from the Principal Business Summit here in New York City and other great videos on our channel talking about how we can learn about capitalism through doing business and learn about doing business through learning about capitalism. And our guest today is David Thayer. He's a recently retired partner of Blackstone, and he's graciously agreed to give us some time and answer some of our questions. Thank you very much, David.
Indeed,
Pleasure
Bill.
to meet you.
Pleasure to be here.
And so the first thing I want to start off with, we had a little discussion before we met here, and you talked about something called narrow skill blindness, and that there's a benefit to understanding the broader world through theories to help overcome this. Could you describe to us what this narrow skill blindness is, what that danger is in the workplace or in investing, and what you mean by understanding the broader world and how that helps?
Sure. What I found is that in my professional career, perhaps outside of it as well, that folks can often be very adept at a specific skill set, which tends to be very good for their career projection or trajectory, but it can blind them and inure them to incentives that otherwise would benefit them. So because of their own success, because they've mastered this skill set, they have very little incentive to kind of look outside of their silo, which as they progress in their careers does not necessarily serve them well, because that's when it most benefits you to have this broader perspective. So I think this applies in business. I think it applies in your career, in investing, also perhaps in your personal life, to develop the skill to sort of scan the horizon for emergent opportunities and just be aware of what's happening in the world. And then also to really refine one's filter so that you can kind of sift the wheat from the chaff and understand what's just white noise versus what's providing signal. And then to also have, and perhaps most importantly, have a fundamental framework within which to view the world. What I have found with some folks is that they engage in what is probably induction, in that they're boiling the ocean, trying to discern nuggets of information that may be floating on the surface beneath the surface, whereas deduction can be more constructive and helpful in that if you approach life with a framework, and I think we may share one, that being the Austrian economics school, but a framework could be your Christian worldview or whatever it might happen to be, that will inform those information nuggets that are kind of coming your way. If you combine all that into one, I think you can be a successful investor and do better as you kind of progress through your career, and I hope also perhaps in your life.
No, that's really interesting, because one of the things we're trying to do at the Academy, not teach things for memorization, but a framework for looking at the world that helps you pick out useful, valuable things that you can engage in productively and enjoy life.
Well, in fact, there's an example which I probably should have brought up, which is that you're aware of my interest in Bitcoin and in hard money, gold, etc. A long time interest. But most of my career has been spent in the capital markets, and yet most of the folks I know, even very successful ones and some very well known, really never have stopped to think, what is money? And again, I think it's incentives. They've been so successful, they don't have to ask that question. And the current system, the fiat system, has benefited them. So they often don't stop to think, what is this thing upon which we've kind of built our castles? And so I think it could be super helpful, like a fish swimming and doesn't know it's in water, to ask those sort of elemental questions.
And do you think that gives us some or could give a person some perspective on the current and future value of things like the dollar?
100%. I mean, so I won't name the firm, but I was working at a firm that dismissed the idea of Bitcoin. It's even sort of career risk to bring it up. But had they taken a more sort of fundamental, essential approach to, what is money or what is capital, I think they could have seen around that corner and seen the emergence of Bitcoin as, one use case for hard money.
And Bitcoin, very interesting. When it first came out, woe to me, I thought it was like Napster and could be shut down.
Right.
But Bitcoin's a dispersed network. How does that factor into it kind of not be able to shut down like you shut down like Napster?
Right.
The longevity of Bitcoin and stability over this dispersed network. Could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. I'm not necessarily a technical expert when it comes to Bitcoin, but I will say that it does feel familiar if you're acquainted with free markets and emergent systems, because it is decentralized, and it's the only cryptocurrency protocol that is decentralized. And that's the beauty of its strength, because it's very difficult, if not impossible, to shut down. I mean, China tried to shut down Bitcoin mining some years ago and failed because everyone just took their miners elsewhere. And there's Bitcoin mining taking place underground in China, and some think on the part of some party members, interestingly. But so yeah, the broader, it's like, is it Moore's Law? It's sort of well, it's not Moore's Law, but there is a law, and I apologize because I've forgotten what it's called, but nonetheless, the broader a network becomes and the more widely dispersed, the stronger it is. And that's one of the many strengths of Bitcoin, and I think it's impossible to shut down now.
Well, one, we know that China wouldn't be half-hearted, so if they failed, and I didn't know this, that's incredible. And two, I had never thought of tying in sort of the value of Bitcoin and its investors to theories about the values of like a Facebook network,
right?
And those seem to be connected and worth looking into. That's cool.
Yeah.
So I want to come back to the broader view of the world,
Sure.
which we're doing. You talked about you mentioned Austrian economics earlier. Could you tell us a little bit more about the relationship between understanding Austrian economics and doing better finance, both for business and personal investment? And is there any particular aspect of Austrian economics maybe our viewers could start off with or pay particular attention to?
Sure, there's a lot to say. But I think two of the more well-known personalities would be Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich von Hayek. And those are two, I think, great places to start. Mises was well known for having written a book called Human Action, which I think is really important because, and this is also sort of emblematic of Austrian economics anyway, it's sort of devoid of fancy mathematical equations and so forth, and it's more about describing economics as a system of human behavior, which is why he called his book Human Action. It's, people think of economics as being sort of numerical and pointy-headed and so forth, and it's really just describing human psychology and what results from that, and much of it's kind of based upon this old Latin phrase, cui bono, right? Who benefits? And so I think a lot of the world, speaking of frameworks, can be explained by just thinking about who benefits. When there's some crazy public policy that comes down the pike, just think to yourself, who benefits? And if that becomes habitual, then it really does have explanatory and, more importantly, predictive value, because that's, I think, helpful in terms of investing. So that's one thing to consider. And then also when it comes to Hayek, he was, I think well known for having propagated the notion of localized knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so that too speaks to the value of network effects. And so there's no use, as in like the Soviet Politburo, kind of making pronouncements on high and sort of implementing these policies when they have no real knowledge as to what the mining output should be in a given mine, and whatever it might happen to be, some Kazakhstan or something. And that's what they tried to do and obviously failed at doing, whereas that organically emergent knowledge is what makes markets so interesting and I would argue, roughly perfect. I went to the University of Chicago, so I got sort of the full bore
perfect market.
Yeah, right, exactly. Weak form, free market hypothesis. But I buy into it. I understand there are human psychological elements that play into it. I studied a guy named Dick Thayer, who talked a lot about behavioral finance. But by the same token, they don't necessarily have a broader and deeper impact on prices, which are really reflective of that overall emergent knowledge. Not to go down this rabbit hole too far, but one other thing I should mention is that there was a book called Wisdom of Crowds.
Yes.
I don't know if you read it, but it was fascinating. He never quite made the ultimate conclusion, which is that markets work. But he did talk about the fact that if you go to a state fair and you see people betting on or placing wagers on the number of marbles in a jar or the weight of a heifer or something, the responses are almost invariably wrong, but the average of the responses are almost invariably right, which is just fascinating. So, as applied to markets, that would imply that markets are largely perfect in their pricing when given the opportunity to kind of float and determine where that intersection is of supply and demand.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, let's say the stock price is sort of the final expression of that local knowledge. And that local knowledge, as we said with Hayek, is really important. And that's how it gets to the market through pricing mechanisms.
That's exactly right.
Now, this as a finance person. Is there a way, the mine or the thing is way over there, you're way over here. Is there a way to tap into that local knowledge to help you with investing? Or do you just have to wait till it's expressed in a stock price?
Yeah, I think there is a way. It kind of relates to what we were discussing earlier about, the frameworks and the scanning of the horizon and the applying of a refined filter. But also, speaking of Chicago, I studied under somebody else there named Nathaniel Burt, and he talked a lot about network theory. It's actually kind of interesting because you can actually apply things like, electrical circuits to human behavior and so forth. It sounds a little arcane, but to answer your question, one of the things that is well known within network theory is that broader networks are more important than firm relationships. So in other words, you can have a tenuous connection to lots of different people, but that's more valuable to you in terms of your social advancement or your career advancement, also your investing behavior, than it would be if you had very strong relationships with a handful of people. So it's the number of nodes that matters. And you can see all this applies to other things. Bitcoin is an example. We were just talking about that. But I think it is a way to help your investment approach, if that's the question. Because if you have lots of different relationships and you're sort of acquiring bits of knowledge from lots of different areas, that can be really helpful. It's almost like in statistics, and I mentioned this earlier today on stage, we all know that a robust statistical data set is defined in part by having lots of data points and having lots of diverse data points. And if you have those two things combined, you probably have a robust data set. And so that applies to your personal life too. Have lots of friends from different walks of life, and even like a meeting or committee meeting or something, you have lots of different voices. You're probably going to arrive at a more robust conclusion than you would if it were sort of a meeting of like minds, fun as that is.
No, I'm sorry. It just briefly made me think of a personal story. I was unemployed for 2 years, never thought I'd get back into academia.
Okay.
Dropped the ego, and I've sent an email blast out to every single one of my friends.
Right.
If you know of anything. And I got a response back from somebody I never thought I would, which led to the job I have now.
That's really interesting.
Because of just the kind of thing that you just talked about.
Yeah, that's neat.
That is cool, and it's also cool to hear that come back and think about it in a broader framework.
Right.
And not just about maybe a job, although that is finance or anything else that one might be interested in.
And I do think that, that old adage about it's who you know, not what you know, actually does come into play. It's not like what you know doesn't matter, but I think who you know informs what you know. And so having lots of diverse relationships and reading lots of diverse news sources and so forth, X, Twitter is great for this, can be really helpful in your personal life.
Cool. I've seen and read that you've done, and this actually follows just from what we said. I didn't plan this. But you do work with the Open Discourse Project, and specifically the Open Discourse Project is being exposed to a diversity of viewpoints.
Right.
And do you think that's missing for students today? And do you think, which I think I know the answer now, but do you think that being exposed to a diversity of viewpoints is actually really helpful, not harmful to students?
Yeah, amen. I mean, absolutely, right? I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy said last night, we're past peak woke, and I would agree with that. However, I don't know that we're at a point yet, at least within the commanding heights, sort of academia, journalism, to an extent, government, et cetera, that we've quite reached the point where people are welcoming all viewpoints. The Open Discourse Coalition, which is currently based out of Bucknell University in Pennsylvania, but expanding elsewhere, is really meant to make it okay to talk about things that were even recently considered verboten, because it's better for everybody just to air this out in sort of the marketplace of ideas. As you know, you're in academia, but that's sort of flown the coop in academia for reasons only partially known. And it seems to be gaining some traction, thank God, because I think it benefits everybody. Right now, it feels like conservative voices and libertarian voices are underrepresented, voices of faith. Having said that, the table might someday flip, and I think it's going to be equally important to have, voices from the other side of the fence represented as well. I'm involved in a company called American Cloud, and the whole idea is to make sure that everybody has access to the cloud and to the internet, and that it's censorship free and nobody can be canceled. And we would like to think that it's also better than Amazon Web Services and so forth, but it came out of that desire to ensure that nobody would be canceled. But we recently took on our first client who's Marxist, and we're very happy about that, because it's not just for conservatives, it's for anybody who wants an open internet.
No, that's really cool. And I talked, it's Aaron, right?
Yeah, that's right, Aaron
I
Weiner.
talked to him last night about that too.
Yeah, good.
And once again, dispersed networks,
Right.
And all of that comes to play.
That's right.
No, that's amazing. And look up is it the Open Discourse Project or
Open Discourse Coalition? Yes.
The Open Discourse Coalition. We'll post a link for that right below the video. To follow up on that, and if you want to bring that to your campus, contact them as well.
Yeah, please.
As we're concluding up here, is there anything you would like to add to what we said? Any thoughts that you might have had that maybe I haven't asked?
Yeah, sure. Well, it sounds trite to say it, but I think it's wildly important to be a courageous contrarian, to swim against the current, not to buy into the hive mind, to be willing to, in an informed sense, because you have to be right and contrarian, not just a contrarian for the sake of it, but in all walks of life, not just in investing, to be willing to arrive at your own conclusions and to act upon them. Just in my own life, I can't count the number of times I felt like I was right about that, but I never did anything about it. And so I'm trying to get better about executing, but I would especially encourage everyone to be willing to kind of strike out on their own. I was just talking to your prior interviewee, Matt Cole, about this. There's something called preference falsification. Do you know that term?
No, actually, no.
So it's when people think something but aren't kind of allowed to say it for whatever reason, so they self-censor.
I've seen that.
Right, as have I, and I've experienced it. So as a result, the truth doesn't emerge because nobody's willing to talk about it. But then it feels like suddenly some ideas emerge and explode to the surface. Thomas Kuhn talked about this in his book about paradigm shifts. And so that phenomenon is called preference cascade. And it's when everyone's been thinking something but kind of didn't feel comfortable saying it. But then once a few brave souls say it, then it's okay to say it. And that's how the Berlin Wall fell, and all these monumental occasions in history have come about because a few brave souls were willing to kind of go against the grain. So I'd like to be better about that myself, and I would just encourage everybody else to do the same.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you very much, David,
All right,
for
thank
joining
you,
us
Bill.
today.
That was a pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for joining us today. And once again, make sure to hit the like button or the subscribe button. And thank you, David Thayer, and we will see you all again.